Hi, Mary. Are you all right?
Fine, thank you. I'm going to talk to you about telling the story. I've got pictures running throughout, so you've got something nice to look at while I'm talking. This is the way that I see Greater Lincolnshire and Rutland. It's a wonderful mix of city, coast, and countryside. Variety everywhere you look. The heritage of Lincoln and the market towns. A coastline that mixes fun and thrills with nature at its best, and all linked with huge sandy beaches. It's all set in lovely countryside, the rolling wolds, the Lincoln Edge, Rutland Water, and the mysterious fens, all with charming villages, and every view a spire or a tower. There are over 600 churches in the county. But I don't like tourism cliches, the undiscovered this, the off the beaten track the other. To me, it's the stories that bring Lincolnshire to life, giving it personality and individuality. It may be a rural backwater now, but in former times, this was a wealthy county with plenty of medieval wheeling and dealing going on. Lincolnshire played key roles in both world wars, building aircraft, the first tanks, and home to many airfields. Henry VIII called Lincolnshire the most brute and beastly in the realm, and this speaks to our independent spirit. We like to do things our own way. Quite right, too. I'm going to tell you some Lincolnshire stories just to show you what I mean and give you a taster of what we have to offer. Skegness was just a village in 1873 when local landowner, the Earl of Scarborough, decided that the popularity of the seaside could only grow. He commissioned plans for a model watering place with wide tree-lined streets on a grid system, promenades, gardens, and a pier. The Earl was right, and when the Great Northern Railway Company commissioned John Hassell in 1908 to draw the Skegness is So Bracing poster featuring the Jolly Fisherman, its success was secured. This most famous of adverts was to promote a special 3-shilling excursion from King's Cross. Skegness continued to make tourism history when in 1921 a poor travelling showman, Billy Butlin, set up his hoopla stalls here. By 1929 he'd opened a large amusement park, and by 1935 had built the Butlins holiday camp. There are coastal resorts that have come and gone. RSPB Freeston Shore is now home to thousands of migrating birds, but in the first half of the 19th century it was a popular seaside resort, with visitors arriving by charabancs, at least 2 hotels, and horse racing on the beach. Now there remains barely a trace. As you walk or cycle along the coast, look out for the fortifications built to protect Britain against German invasion. Begun after the evacuation at Dunkirk, the coastal crust was designed as a first line of defence against invasion. It involved many types of structure, some of which can still be seen: pillboxes, searchlight batteries, anti-tank structures, and machine gun posts. The gun emplacements were camouflaged as bungalows, ice cream parlours, or chicken sheds, and the linear marks bisecting fields are probably anti-landing trenches dug to prevent aircraft landing. Much survives along Lincolnshire's coast as an evocative reminder of the desperate days of 1940. These concrete remains, even a pillbox in a peaceful churchyard, they're recent history and give the landscape added meaning. The history of the RAF is much more visible, with disused wartime airfields across the county, together with some still active. The sights and sounds of the RAF are never far away: the Red Arrows practicing a new manoeuvre, the strangely shaped AWACS on their practice runs around Waddington, the Eurofighter, or the Lancaster Hurricanes and Spitfires of the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, returning to RAF Coningsby after a weekend display. There were almost 50 air bases during the war. Each was like a small town, and you can just imagine what their impact must have been on the lives of such a remote rural population. The International Bomber Command Centre on the edge of Lincoln commemorates the nearly 58,000 men and women from 62 nations who lost their lives supporting Bomber Command. The 31-metre tall spire is in direct sight of Lincoln Cathedral, which provided such an important landmark for crews both leaving and returning from missions. The Dam Busters raid was flown from Lincolnshire, considered an almost impossible task, flying low at night over hundreds of miles of enemy territory to drop a new, untested bomb. There is no doubting the bravery of 617 Squadron or the ingenuity of aircraft designer Barnes Wallis and his revolutionary bouncing bomb. There are many aviation heritage sites that tell these stories, but do visit a much smaller memorial to be found in the graveyard of the village of Scopwick. High Flight, a poem loved by aviators, was written by 19-year-old John Gillespie McGee, a wartime Spitfire pilot with the Royal Canadian Air Force. He was killed in 1941 when his plane collided in mid-air over Lincolnshire. High Flight, written on the back of an envelope, was sent home to his parents weeks before the crash. "Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth," the poem's first line, was quoted by President Ronald Reagan after the Challenger disaster. There's no surprise that Lincoln Cathedral is such a landmark. William the Conqueror picked this strategic site of a former Roman fortress to build his castle in 1068 and the cathedral in 1072. They're very clear messages, proclaiming his power and dominance to his new population. One the stick, the other the carrot. Lincoln Cathedral has hosted Parliament, welcomed kings, buried queens, and withstood armed attack. The cathedral's sister building, Lincoln Castle, is clearly William's stick, sending out his "I'm in charge now" statement. It's a pragmatic building, functional where the cathedral is beautiful, built using lower quality stone and having money spent on it only when needed. But it was the site of the most significant battle waged on English soil since 1066. The Battle of Lincoln Fair in 1217 is so little known, but it is the reason that we're not French. King John had died in 1216, his son Henry was only 9, and the barons turned against the crown and invited the son of the King of France to take over. The deciding battle was at Lincoln. The infant Henry was represented by William Marshall, a man fated as the greatest knight in all the world. They were heavily outnumbered by the French, but Marshall planned carefully and used the local topography, and by creating a diversion, took the French by surprise, with a fierce fight taking place between castle and cathedral. The French were pursued down steep hill, at huge disadvantage, fighting while going backwards downhill. Many were caught in the bottleneck at the southern gate and were slaughtered. William Marshall had led the Royalists to a stunning victory. This is not a battlefield as a field. Everything is still there. Castle, cathedral, Newport Arch, steep hill. Lincolnshire poet Alfred Lord Tennyson was probably the first poet to gain fame and fortune in his own lifetime. He was hero worshipped to such a degree that he was completely plagued by sightseers peering in through his window and lurking at his gate. His early life in Lincolnshire was more difficult, and his family were quite eccentric. He was one of 11 children, and they roamed far and wide, day and night. Alfred began writing poetry at an early age, and he was often seen rambling the local lanes, mumbling to himself. The Tennyson family were very early adopters of the seaside holiday, when it was still considered a very odd thing to do, and they went to stay in a cottage at Mablethorpe each year. Lincolnshire's natural coast repays visits across the seasons. This is a migration superhighway, so expect a constantly changing range of visiting birds. Not necessarily a best time, just a whole series of brilliant opportunities. A thriving colony of grey seals arrived to give birth in November to January, making for a noisy wildlife spectacle as around 2,000 pups are born at Donanook. The flowering and fruiting of the plant life adds another dimension and supports the vibrant bird and insect life. Those banks of sculptural sea holly and sea buckthorn with its vibrant orange berries are usually full of bird life and more, and it's worth standing and staring a while just to see who calls this home. Sections of the National Coastal Path are in place and work is ongoing on completing the route. Sometimes you will walk on the beach and at other times tucked behind the dunes in shelter. Rutland is England's smallest county. Its county motto is Multum in Parvo, which means much in little and rather perfectly describes it. When Rutland Water was built in the 1970s to provide water for Peterborough, Northampton and Corby, it was one of Europe's biggest man-made lakes. It has a great cycle path that encircles the water and the chance to see Rutland's iconic ospreys that feed and breed here. Oakham Castle was constructed in the 1180s, and any passing peer of the realm has had to forfeit a horseshoe on their first visit to the town ever since. This unique collection is displayed in the remaining Great Hall, which is the finest surviving example of Norman domestic architecture and sits at the heart of the town. There's nothing I like more than a bonnet drama, and Lincolnshire has frequently taken a starring role. Both the BBC's Pride and Prejudice and the film version were filmed here, Belton House and Burley House respectively. And when the BBC filmed Middlemarch, they came to Stamford and found that they could film long tracking shots without a single Victorian building, let alone a 20th or a 21st century building, getting in the way. Lincoln Cathedral has stepped in to play the part of Westminster Abbey, and Lincoln Castle has appeared in Call the Midwife and Downton Abbey. I've probably gone on far too long. I could have told you about our great adventurers Matthew Flinders, George Bass, Joseph Banks and John Smith, not to mention the Pilgrim Fathers and brothers John and Charles Wesley, known across the world. What about Sir William Robertson, commander of the British Army during the last 2 years of the First World War? Robertson is the only soldier in the history of the British Army to have risen from an enlisted rank to its highest rank of Field Marshal. I could have done stories just about people who rather prove that independent spirit and Henry VIII's view that we are brute and beastly, but I'll leave that for another day. But my view remains the same. Just tell the story. And I'm interested to hear what you all think. And thanks very much for listening.
Wow, that was incredible. And the feedback on the comments has just been really nice. Just loving the story approach. What a beautiful, diverse county we live in. Learning so much from your great Lincolnshire story. Thank you, Mary. Learning so much. Fascinating in the history of our county. I think that was a lovely slide deck as well. I was trying to keep it in time with what you were talking about at the time. That was the difficulty.
Probably not.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Mary.